There are two main commitments that have been made in the Brazilian beef sector. So the first is something called the TAC. So these are the Terms of Adjustment of Conduct, and they are legally binding commitments by individual slaughterhouses in the Amazon to avoid buying beef from farms that have cleared forest illegally. The second is something called the G4. This is a commitment by Greenpeace and then the three largest meatpacking companies, so JBS, Minerva and Mafrig, who all also export. And they've committed to zero deforestation, not just illegal. Now, the thing is, with the new Trase data, we identify more than 150,000 hectares of deforestation risk, which is actually linked to the exports of these three companies. So, why do we still see deforestation risk when these companies have made commitments? Part of the answer is that these companies only monitor their direct suppliers. They're not looking down the supply chain, actually, at the bulk of the problem, which are all the farms who sell cattle but are also associated with deforestation, which ultimately ends up in their supply chain. What we've been doing is we've included those indirect suppliers where the data allow, and that allows us to capture those risks more holistically. The second is that those commitments only apply to the Amazon. And what we see with the Trase data, which maps the deforestation risk across the Amazon and Cerrado, but maps beef sourcing from across the country, is that actually 45 to 60% of the deforestation risk linked to these three companies who've made a commitment is occurring outside the Amazon, in the Cerrado, where cattle ranching is also expanding into forests and into savanna. What this suggests is that for these companies to eliminate deforestation in Brazilian beef exports or across their supply chains, they need to extend those commitments both beyond the Amazon to the rest of Brazil, but also beyond just the farms that they buy from directly, including all their indirect suppliers. Trase data is really powerful in the hands of a number of actors. First of all, the companies themselves and the investors looking at making investors across the agricultural sector, right? To identify hotspots of risk. So where is your company sourcing linked to deforestation, so that they can go on the ground, identify important places to engage with producers. It's also useful for engaging sort of the positive stories. So where has deforestation gone down? Where are commitments, zero deforestation commitments that some of these companies have made, where are they working? And Trase data can be used to evaluate that over time. Beyond companies, governments have a need for high-resolution trade data like this. There are 7 European countries who have made a commitment to have zero deforestation commodities. Germany, France, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Norway, and Italy. For the first time, using Trase data, they're able to monitor the impact of that commitment. Are the changes that companies in those countries making having any impact on the ground and reducing the deforestation risk imported into those markets? Then, of course, there are NGOs, journalists, and investors, again, who can use this information to map risks, to link it to specific companies, and to monitor progress over time. We live in a digital age where consumers are used to having information about everything on their smartphone or whatever. But though food is such an important sector and industry, it's a big part of our lives, the whole food industry is lagging behind in providing information to consumers about where their food comes from and what the impacts are. And if that information isn't available, then to push for it. These companies just need a small nudge to disclose and to investigate better what the impact of the food that they sell is. We've just completed subnational beef, but first of all, it needs to be updated. So we want these data to be useful for people to monitor the progress, so how deforestation risk is changing over time. Secondly, we want to expand beyond Brazil. We have now subnational data on Brazilian beef, Paraguayan beef, but we want to cover beef from across Latin America, and ultimately Trase has the goal of covering 70% of deforestation risk commodities by 2021. And lastly, back in Brazil, exports are responsible for about 20% of the Brazilian market. There's still that 80% which is eaten by Brazilian consumers, and we're going to have a go at mapping the Brazilian supply chains as well.